Chinese President Xi Jinping has broken the two-term limit with Premier Li Keqiang on his way out, apparently because they didn't see eye to eye on the zero COVID policy. Is this an indication that there is no collective leadership and Xi Jinping's vision will be seen over the next 5 years? And what does the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation actually mean? More trouble on the Taiwan and Indian borders with Tibet? I'm Gaurav Sawant. We discuss, we debate. But first, as always, let's get started with the headlines on India first. Delhi's Deputy Chief Minister Manish Sisodia questioned by the CBI over Liquorgate for close to 9 hours. The Aam Aadmi Party stages a massive dharna in the national capital. (9,500) Congress party delegates vote for a new party president. Mallikarjun Kharge remains the odds-on favourite against Shashi Tharoor. Results on Wednesday. Massive outrage over 40-day parole to rape convict Gurmeet Ram Rahim. Dera Sacha Sauda. Chief has been released for the third time in 2022. Yog Guru Baba Ramdev stirs a controversy, launches alcohol and drug-free campaign, claims Bollywood is drowning in drugs, accuses top superstars of consumption. Ukraine says kamikaze drone hits Kyiv today. It's the second attack on the capital city in a week. Videos of the Galwan clash between India and China at Galwan played out at the Great Hall of People in Beijing. The Chinese regimental commander was one of the invitees of the Chinese Communist Party Congress. President Xi Jinping spoke of intensifying military training under combat conditions and to be more adept at deploying military forces on a regular basis. He also refused to rule out forcible reunification of Taiwan. Now, will the world see a more aggressive Chinese President Xi Jinping in the years ahead? That's our top story.
These images of the June 15, 2020 clash at Galwan in Ladakh, when Indian soldiers pushed back Chinese aggressors, were played out at the Chinese Communist Party Congress, where Chinese President Xi Jinping looks set to get an unprecedented third term. The Chinese regiment commander at Galwan, Qi Fibao, was among the 2,300 delegates and invitees at the crucial Congress at the Great Hall of People in Beijing. Regimental Commander Fibao was one of the 304 special invitees of the People's Liberation Army. Chinese President Xi Jinping spoke at length of his past 5 years' achievements. The wheels of history are rolling on towards China's reunification and rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. Complete reunification of our motherland must be realized and can without doubt be realized. China watchers believe after 10 years of being in power, Xi Jinping now is virtually the most powerful man in China. His core focus areas remain consolidating his control over the army and the party. He remains the General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party and the Chairman of the Central Military Commission, and will be President of China for another 5 years, or as some argue, for life. This way, he becomes the most powerful man in China after Chairman Mao Zedong. Xi Jinping spoke of the need to intensify military training under combat conditions, laying emphasis on group training and to be more adept at deploying military forces on a regular basis. We will comprehensively strengthen military training enhance combat preparedness, and improve the people's military's ability to win. We will innovate military strategic guidance, develop strategies and tactics for people's war, and build a strong system of strategic deterrent. We will increase the number of new domain forces with new combat capabilities and further promote combat training. Analysts argue Xi Jinping soon will be more aggressive both on Taiwan and on the line of actual control with India. Experts say with President Xi talking about the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation, Beijing is likely to be more aggressive towards Taiwan, if not immediately, then in the coming years.
China's issues with India are not as problematic as they are at all with America, for instance. But I mean, it's not an easy relationship, and the unresolved border dispute doesn't look like it's going to be resolved anytime soon. That will always be a cause of tension. So I think there will be problems. The issue is, are they big problems or manageable problems?
However, the state of the Chinese economy, the shrinking workforce, and the impact of zero COVID policy remain President Xi Jinping's Achilles heel. Xi Jinping's third term is being watched by the world very closely. It could well be make or break for President Xi and for China in the decade ahead. Bureau Report, India Today.
So what does a more powerful Xi Jinping mean for the region and for the world? Analysts argue his track record is that of aggression. From wolf warriors to death trap diplomacy, especially in dealing with developing countries, and of course aggression both at Taiwan and the borders with India, Tibet's borders with India. In his third term, is there a timeline for targeting Taiwan, and what happens along the India-Tibet border? Joining me for a 360-degree perspective on this big development, Lieutenant General Syed Atta Hasnain. General Hasnain commanded the Kashmir Corps. He's a keen China watcher. Also with me is Brian Ho, who's the editor of New Blue magazine, joins us from Taipei, Taiwan, and NR Tangent is advisor Taipei Institute, who joins us from Beijing. General Hasnain, videos of the Galwan clash playing out at the Great Hall, the regimental commander participating in this meet. What's the writing on the wall, on the Great Wall, domestically and internationally, sir?
Thank you, Ranga. Thank you very much for having me on this show. Very, very important discussion today. Yes, the Chinese are great people at symbolism. This whole presentation of the commander of the Galwan troops, the Chinese PLA troops there, it was essentially to send home a message. China was aggressive. China won that clash as per them. And China will continue to win clashes against India. That is the message which is being sent out into this 20th Chinese Communist Party Congress. It's very important to project this because in today's world, if you see, conventional warfare really has its place, but there is no guarantee of winnability. And the Chinese are hell-bent somehow to say that they got the better of India when it comes to the LAC clash in Ladakh in April 2020. I think that's the picture that they are sending out, and we are all aware of the fact that China, over the last 30 years, has built up this whole system of psychological warfare, media warfare, cyber warfare as a combination, which is essentially the frontline aspect of it, with the main force acting as the deterrent behind.
No.
So
but
I think
is that a message that China is sending out domestically? Because internationally, the truth is known. And perhaps...
Absolutely. Absolutely, Gaurav, you are absolutely 100% right. This is an internal consumption exercise. Most of this is happening for the internal public as such. Nationalism is a very important aspect here. China realizes that nationalism internationally is rising in different nations. And it's important to play up Chinese nationalism within. This is the right time perhaps for them to play up this.
Okay. In our tangent, is that also your appreciation? Nationalism is being played up internally. Now, is that an attempt so that there are no voices of dissent internally in case there are in this Chinese Communist Party Congress? Because we still do not have details of the fatalities and the casualties on the Chinese side after the conflict. Later, China did concede 4 or 5 fatalities, but the Russian agency TASS had claimed 44 Chinese fatalities. So, sir, is this regimental commander some kind of a mascot to hide the shame of the setback that China received in Galwan, and that is why they want to intensify their training so that they can win future local wars?
No, not really. First
Mr.
off,
Tangent,
the border clash with India was not even mentioned. Yes, he was present, so were 2,600 other people. And I think this is being overplayed by my colleague. He might sense that that's what China is doing, but obviously there was no mention of Galwan or anything like that by Xi Jinping.
The video was played out.
Else.
The video was played out.
Well,
if it wasn't important,
the video was played out,
but
it's an example. You know, remember there are 2 different narratives. There's the Indian narrative and Beijing's narrative. So, you know, from their perspective, they think that they were attacked. India thinks it was attacked. The fact is that you're talking about an area where the border has not been settled. So rather than getting into, you know, you're wrong or they're wrong, let's just talk about the situation, which is that for China, the main issue is Taiwan. And that is the most significant regional threat that they see. Taiwan was settled to be part of China back in the 70s and 80s when the 3 communiques were signed. And the U.S. kicked Taiwan out of the UN and exceeded this one China policy. Now it's been under revision. Tai Ing-wen and her party are being encouraged to play this kind of semi-independence card. And Xi Jinping was just laying down the fact that Taiwan, under China's constitution, is part of China, and that they will defend that.
And try and take it by force. So I'll come to the use of force or not ruling out renunciation of use of force in just a moment. But Brian, what's the assessment in Taiwan, especially on China's refusal to promise renunciation of use of force? Is there a thinking that China is waiting for that right moment to strike?
Yes, there's not actually a lot of discussion of the 20th National Congress in Taiwan. Domestic news stories often dominate, and Chinese military threats are nothing new. And so in that sense, there is relative calm. People are not talking about this in the sense of that this is the only news story. It is a front-page news story, but one among many. So with regards to that, yeah, Taiwan is the pressing issue for China at present. Taiwan is obviously on China's doorstep. China is also reliant on Taiwan for key goods such as semiconductors. Its own supply lines are highly dependent on. I just stress that the U.S. position on Taiwan is that it is undecided. The U.S. One China policy and China's One China principle have never been the same thing. And oftentimes Americans themselves, American government officials, are not actually aware of this and oftentimes conflate their own government position with that of China's. But in that sense, I think Xi is trying to tout Taiwan as an accomplishment. I don't actually think he is so hasty to war here, given the economic cataclysm and the enormous loss of life that would occur in the event of a Taiwan contingency. That's not something that China can weather at present. And so Xi is touting China and Taiwan as having accomplished stuff regarding Taiwan. And so that is the reason why then he should be granted a 3rd term. He has made gains in Taiwan.
Okay. So he knows the consequences. President Xi Jinping, General Hasnain, is that also your assessment that Xi Jinping knows the consequences? As Brian points out, I was in Taiwan last month. I interacted with some of their military commanders, and they said that the losses on the Chinese side will be immense in case China attempts to take Taiwan by force. So will China wait perhaps through this decade, increase its military and economic strength, and then in the coming decade try and take over Taiwan, perhaps even by force?
See, Gaurav, President Xi is today about almost 70 years old.
Yes.
And he's, well, got 10 years, 12 years, or whatever it is. Taiwan is going to be a legacy issue for him. He would want to leave behind an integrated Taiwan as far as China is concerned. How late or how early he begins depends on that a lot. But in today's world, there is no guarantee, as we have seen from this war in Ukraine at the moment. There is no question of a weak state and a powerful state. You've seen a combination of states You've seen technologically enabled states being actually disabled completely. So guarantees of victory are not there. And Xi Jinping cannot afford defeat. Under no circumstances can he see a rollback of the PRC from the shores of Taiwan getting back, because that will take the next 40 or 50 years for them to get back into Taiwan again. So whatever he does has to be done with a degree of guarantee. So I do think he's going to move carefully on this. And this is the window which the rest of the world will have, or at least the United States will have, or whoever else is there in the Indo-Pacific as interested players at that time will have. This is the window. So I don't think he is going to be in a hurry to do anything in the very near future. The next 5 years will take a lot of time to consolidate. Perhaps the projection of a new world order based on the Chinese concept of thinking now. This is the time when he will start shaping this kind of a thing.
Okay.
The strike point is Taiwan. It is not the start point which is Taiwan.
Okay, the strike point is Taiwan. So next 5 years, you say he'll consolidate, and then he has another 5 years, perhaps at best. He cannot afford another Galwan-like situation where the army rushes into something and then is unable to carry it to its logical conclusion. In our tangent, is that also your appreciation? Because China's refused to renounce the option of use of force in Taiwan. Does China want to keep this sword of Damocles hanging on Taiwan's head? Or is there a realization, as Brian Ho, our guest from Taiwan, points out, that there will be massive casualties in China, and Xi Jinping knows that?
Well, quite frankly, I find Brian's analysis a little strange. He talked about the massive consequences for China. I'm not in favor of war. I don't think it achieves anything, as we've seen in Ukraine. But quite frankly, mainland China does not have to fire one shot to reduce Taiwan to its knees. Over 40% of Taiwan's economy, if you add Hong Kong and the mainland together, which obviously they're the same thing, all they have to do is say, Taiwanese, please leave and take, and you were going to confiscate your possessions. They haven't done that. I don't think they will. They're not going to act like the U.S. did towards Russia by taking the property of individuals without recourse to law, or making any proof that just because you're Russian that you can take their money.
So in our tangent, so you say that to bring Taiwan to its knees, China can just tell all the Taiwanese businesses and nationals in their country to get back to Taiwan. Brian, respond to that.
It would be 40% of their economy.
Fair enough. But what impact will that have on the Chinese economy? But Brian also wants to respond. Respond, Brian.
So yeah, I mean, economic relations go two ways. China is highly dependent on Taiwanese semiconductors. So what happens then? The nuclear option for Taiwan perhaps is cut off access to semiconductors for China. So that everything from Teslas to the missiles that China has directed at Taiwan are reliant on Taiwanese semiconductors. The integration of any country, whether it's small or large, and Taiwan is a medium-sized country. You look at the size of the population, similar to Australia, 20th or so largest economy in the world. It's not small. And given that, China it's not a one-way direction. Assuming then that just you can, say that then we're going to cut off Taiwanese people, we're going to seize their property and so forth. You have to think about which industries are reliant on Taiwan and vice versa. For example, China tried this in the past with tourists, saying that, well, we'll cut off your access of tourists, your economy will go bankrupt. COVID happened. There were not tourists. China reduced the number of tourists going to Taiwan, not heavily affected. For example, in this time frame, China has cut off, for example, exports of grouper, citrus, pineapple from Taiwan to China, and those are very limited industries. Actually, it did not have a huge effect. The government would redirect market shipments elsewhere. These were relatively limited. It was attempting to set an example. But the thing is that it cannot just be seen as China's big, Taiwan is small. That is a very blind understanding of the economy.
Fair enough. General Hasnain, is Xi Jinping now virtually unchallenged in China? There are reports that say that Premier Li Keqiang, who was believed to be critical of Xi Jinping's zero-COVID policy, is likely to step aside. So the only Xi Jinping's yes men would be in the Central Committee, in the Politburo, and the Standing Committee?
See, Gaurav, obviously there has been some disquiet in China over the last 6 to 8 weeks. Normally, these kind of reports don't come out of China, the kind of things that we've been hearing. Everything is otherwise clamped down upon, but we find that a degree of rumor mongering has been taking place. There's no doubt that the next 7 days will tell us who actually, in terms of memberships, who will form a part of all these very, very important institutions which form a part of this entire exercise. But having said that, the fact that there has been a little bit of disquiet, there have been some symbolic protests which has of course been suppressed immediately. There is obviously some seeding which has taken place.
Okay.
And the protests particularly has been against the COVID policy, the handling of the COVID policy. Everyone, social media penetration in China is there, and we know that now with the 5G all over the world in the near future, it's going to be very difficult to clamp down on a lack of transparency. So you will find that there will be some kind of a disquiet and protests, etc., which will be simmering within. The kind of control which Xi Jinping had in the last 10 years may not continue in the manner that it will pan out over the next 5 or maybe 10 years. And therefore, I think controls will be comparatively diluted and Xi Jinping
and not consolidated as some argue. Because some say...
not so much. I think it will be diluted to some extent, and Xi Jinping will be forced to act with greater strength, strongly, more on internal security than on external affairs.
Interesting. In our tangent, also your appreciation, also the fact that former Australian Prime Minister Kevin Rudd was quoted saying China's moving away from collective leadership to Xi being paramount. The entire focus of China will now be implementing Xi's vision of security, Xi's vision of economy, his foreign policy. So will he be all-powerful, or will there be systems of checks and balances?
Well, quite frankly, I mean, many people in the West fail to understand that China works on a consensus basis. This is not like a corporation where 51% decided or the chairman decides everything. It's a very complex, bureaucracy, I should say. And what happens is everything that is planned has to go up and down. And by that, I mean it has to go down to the very bottom, the lowest levels, all the way back up to top. It has to be harmonized. There are millions of man-hours that are put into it. This isn't like the United States or other places where somebody just has an idea and proposes legislation. Everything is very, very thoroughly checked out. In terms of Taiwan, the U.S. is going to make sure that China, the mainland, does not have access to any advanced chips as they promote building these companies, these fab plants in the United States, which will be at the expense of Taiwan. It's fully 15% of their GDP, 40% of their exports. It would be, if these companies do move to the U.S., it'll be tragic for the Taiwanese economy. But in any event, China will be prevented from having these sensitive chips because of the relationship with China. I find it interesting that we're talking about a few issues here, when the majority of the speech was about a common destiny for mankind, shared opportunity, etc.
Sure, but he may talk about common destiny for mankind, but what he does on the borders, whether it's with Taiwan or at Ladakh or the debt trap diplomacy, I think the world is now smarter than falling for China's sweet words and bad actions.
Well,
I'm sure we'll discuss this in the days ahead. I've run out of time on this part of the debate, but Brian, Janal Hasnain and NR Tangent for joining me here on this India Today special broadcast. Many thanks. It's not the Chinese words, it's the Chinese actions that the world will judge China for.